Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Basic Education Board.
Welcome. So this is Mr. Simon. And we are here to talk about fertilizers today. We are here to talk about fertilizers. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hope you enjoy our lesson. Today. We are basically going to be talking about fertilizers, and by the end of this topic, you should make sure you can be able to identify the different fertilizers, especially the ones used at home in your fields. So you see, someone may ask you what is a fertilizer. Who can define for us the term fertilizer? So we are going to quickly talk about fertilizers. Who can define for us the term fertilizers? Fertilizer. So we are going to say a fertilizer is any material that can be used to supply nutrients to the soil. So any material which you normally put in our soil to make sure it is more productive, we call it a fertilizer. So you can give me the different types of fertilizers we normally use in your homes. So thank you very much for those different types of fertilizers, And I know we are going to talk about them, like, for example, NPK. We are going to talk about things like DAP. We are going to talk about even the animal fertilizers. That is from our animals, like for example, cows, like, for example, goats, like, for example, hens. Yeah, those different types of of different sources of fertilizers from those animals, even plants, in form of manure. Yeah. So actually anything we normally put in our soil to make it more productive, we are going to call it a fertilizer. So in agriculture, this time we are talking about agriculture in chemistry. In agriculture, they normally give the components of good fertilizers. So we have going to talk about 3 components in terms of nutrients. Nutrients. So meaning a fertilizer, we can call it a nutrient. We can call it a material that adds these nutrients. So we have major nutrients, secondary nutrients, and micro nutrients. The major nutrients, I think you know something about them. We have, for example, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These are nutrients which are needed by our plants in very, very high quantities. Quantities. Like, for example, we can give an example that if these nutrients are not available for plants, or if they are not there in the soil, our plants cannot grow very well. So we can give another definition and say that these are nutrients without which plants cannot grow. If you don't have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the plants will not grow. So if you look at the role of these nutrients, like, for example, they work actually interchangeably. Like, for example, nitrogen stimulates plant growth, synthesis of proteins, and chlorophyll. So you recognize it's very important. So phosphorus promotes early growth, meaning without phosphorus, the early growth will be very, very difficult. It promotes maturity, promotes growth of roots, flowers, fruits, and seeds. Phosphorus also, it increases the resistance to disease and frost. So again, potassium helps in formation of flowers, fruits, production of sugars, which are very good for our lives, regulates the structure of Of leaves. So you observe that these nutrients are very, very important. Actually, our topic is supposed to be called the NPK fertilizers. So we are basically going to be talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, and the potassium. But in addition to that, we shall talk about other things. So we also have other nutrients which are not needed in very large amount and not in very small amount, which We have calcium, magnesium, and what? Sulfur. In addition to that, we also have the micronutrients. Sometimes we call them the trace nutrients or the minor what? Elements, minor nutrients. So these are nutrients which are required by plants in very small what? Amount. Very small but very important. We have some of these chemicals here. We have, for example, copper, iron, chlorine, manganese, and what? Zinc. Zinc. So these are nutrients. So actually here we have a statement saying recycling organic matter such as grass clippings, tree leaves is an excellent way for providing micronutrients for growing what? Plants. For growing plants. So for example, we are going to talk about this in detail. So let's go and talk about the characteristic of a good fertilizer. So here, we try to talk about the requirements of a good fertilizer. So here, a good fertilizer should have some of these properties, and some of them we have not included here. So let's first try to talk about them, and then you give me more. It should be cheap, that means economically friendly. It should contain the required what? Nutrients, like for example, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Actually, when you're adding fertilizers, especially fertilizers you're going to call the inorganic fertilizers, we are basically concentrating on nitrogen, phosphorus, and the potassium. So it should be soluble in water such that it can be available for what? For plants. It should be soluble in water. You know, when the fertilizer is not soluble in water, it will not be available for what? For plants. So meaning these plants are supposed to absorb this fertilizer, which has dissolved in water, because when it is absorbing, it actually absorbs nutrients from in liquid form. Then it should be stable. Our fertilizer should be what? Stable. It should be stable, meaning it should be available for plants for a long period of what? Time. Meaning if it rains, in case. If it rains and the rain has been a lot, and sometimes if it is a lot, it will force our fertilizers to go down the soil, which we normally call leaching. So it should be stable. Another factor about stability, in the presence of too much sunshine or too much or strong environment, or let's call them harsh environment conditions, you will observe that this fertilizer should not chemically change to other things. So it should be very, very stable. It should not be injurious, meaning it should not burn plants. It should not burn what? Plants. If our fertilizer burns plants, it is a bad fertilizer. I think some of you who normally practice agriculture, you know, agriculture is normally the backbone of our countries, especially in Africa. So even in other countries. So these fertilizers, sometimes when you buy an expired fertilizer, or a fertilizer which is not good, you observe that it will injure our plants, and sometimes you'll find that the whole plantation has gone burnt, hence causing even losses. A good fertilizer should not also cause acidity in the soil. Actually, it should correct the what? The acidity. So you can give me more factors, or more qualities, or more characteristics of a good fertilizer, such that we increase our list to at least around 20. And give you some few seconds to give me more, or you can even write them down. More characteristics of a good fertilizer, or come and look at them. So we increase our list. Who can give us more characteristics of a good fertilizer? Thank you very much for those contributions. Yeah. So let's continue, and we talk about the types of fertilizers. Types of what? Fertilizers. So our fertilizers can be described in two types. We call them the natural fertilizer or the organic fertilizer. The second type, which is not on our slide, is the artificial fertilizer, or we call them inorganic what? Fertilizers. So natural fertilizers, these are fertilizers that come from the compounds of nature. Compounds of what? Nature, like for example, dead plants, waste from animals, and even the minerals. You know, some minerals exist naturally. So we are going to give examples of organic fertilizers in terms of manure. In terms of what? Manure. You know, sometimes we exchange these words. We say fertilizer, then we go to manure because the language also favors some of these words. So like, for example, the first one is farmyard manure, which is normally comes from animals. Like, for example, cows, hens, goats. So the animal droppings will give us farmyard what? Manure. They normally know how. We have not looked at the process of making this farmyard manure, but obviously if you have your droppings, we can call them the cow droppings, or from animals, or from, for example, hens. You keep them from some good period of time, and they mature. They mature. Or we can also process them in our plants. We normally have, or we call them the industries. So we also have green manure, which is a product of plants, especially the green plants. So you have your plants, you allow them to rot. You can also process them in factories. So give them a period of time. So if it is green manure, it takes a long period of time, because you now to give these plants time to rot naturally. To rot what? Naturally. So we also have compost manure, which is anorganic matter, normally obtained from organic what? Matter. Organic matter, like, for example, we can talk about the waste from our places. That is the rubbish things that have been used, which we have obtained from our homes, and they have become as wastes. Like, for example, papers, those things which normally rot, are normally a source of compost what? Manure, which is organic what? Matter. Another fertilizer here, which is part of organic fertilizer, is minerals. The minerals which exist naturally, like powdered limestone, which corrects our acidity, rock phosphate, also, which is a source of phosphorus, sodium nitrate. There are some places where we have sodium nitrate. Then we also have, but these ones are not of biological origin, but again, they are natural. So they are natural, they are also natural. So we need to add them, especially minerals are added we need to carry out research. Need to carry out what? Research, yeah. So we are also going to talk about the artificial fertilizers. These are chemically synthesized, or we call the synthetic fertilizer, or the inorganic fertilizers. For example, the nitrogenous fertilizers containing nitrogen, phosphorus fertilizers containing phosphorus, potassium fertilizers containing potassium what? Chloride. So we also have some examples of mixed fertilizers, like, for example, NP fertilizers. That is the ammonium dihydrogen phosphate. Ammonium dihydrogen phosphate having nitrogen and what? Phosphorus. Then we also have calcium dihydrogen phosphate having phosphorus and also calcium and also nitrogen. Then PK fertilizers containing that is phosphorus and also potassium. Then KN fertilizers containing potassium and nitrogen. NPK fertilizers. NPK fertilizers, it is a mixture of phosphorus, potassium, and calcium. Phosphorus is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Yeah, nitrogen, phosphorus, and what? Potassium. So in these fertilizers, we should have nitrogen, as you see here. We should have phosphorus. So you see, we have mixed the three chemicals. The three what? Chemicals. So if you look at this, the difference between the organic fertilizers and the inorganic fertilizers, you recognize that the other ones are like natural, and these ones are like artificial, hence the name. So we are also going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of organic what? Fertilizers. So if you use organic fertilizer, what are the advantages? So I know you have many advantages, but let's look at these we have on our slides. The first advantage is that they add humus to the soil. They add humus to the what? to the soil. So meaning it will increase the soil what? Level. So what is humus? Yeah, humus is this black coloring matter on top of the soil. Most of you, I know you've seen humus because of where you come from. So they also favor growth of soil organisms. Sometimes the soil organisms are good, sometimes they are bad, but to another advantage, they are good because when they are there, they will break down some of our organic matter in the what? In the soil. So again, the release of nutrients is slow and consistent at a natural rate that plants are able to use. So that's an advantage. Slow rate, which is at the rate of our plants. So they provide a wide range of trace elements, which you have seen when you are talking about trace elements or trace minerals or trace nutrients. They do not burn plants. Normally, these organic fertilizers do not burn plants. It is hard for them to burn plants. They stay long. They are long-lasting and do not bleach. So when you find them, when you add organic fertilizers, they are normally long what? Lasting. So they spend a lot of time in the soil. Even if it rains for a long period of time, it is hard for them to reach. The only process they can disappear from plants is by, for example, soil erosion. So it is easier to maintain the level once a healthy soil condition is reached. Yeah, it is easier to maintain because they don't reach. They control the growth of plants. So you'll observe that when you add them in the soil, it is hard for our plants to grow abnormally. It is hard for them to grow what? Abnormally. They grow at a slow what? At a controlled growth of plants. If you look at our advantages here, we are trying to look at these advantages as we are comparing them to the other inorganic what? Fertilizers. Another advantage of organic fertilizers, which may not be written here, is that when you use organic fertilizers and you want to export your crops or your plants to other countries, like for example the European countries, you'll observe that when the plant you produce will be even accepted in those what? Countries. Hence you will be able to get what? Market. You'll be able to get market. So disadvantages, they produce inconsistent results. Sometimes if you've made your calculations well, like for example, people are doing business and you are doing now agriculture in terms of what? Business. This time you're doing business. You have an acre of land and you want to put a given amount of your fertilizer and to produce a given amount. The calculation may fail because sometimes you may even not know what is inside your organic fertilizer, which elements are there. So it is hard for you to know which elements are there and which elements are missing in the what? In the soil. Normally it is trial and what? And error, which is not good. So they have low levels of nutrients. So as we said, we may not know what is inside our organic fertilizers. So if in case what you want to add in the soil is not there, then it will be very hard for you. It will be very hard for you to get what you want. So hence, if it is very hard for you to get what you want, it means you have low levels of nutrients. Low levels of what? Nutrients. So they take a lot of time to prepare. As you've seen, if you compare them with the other artificial ones, you'll observe that, for example, when you have green manure, you need to give time for the plant to decompose. And because you need to give time for the plant to decompose, it will take a lot of time. Rotting takes a lot of time, or decaying takes a lot of time. So even it causes growth of pests. Sometimes it can cause growth of pests in case when you add these fertilizers inside our gardens, you observe that sometimes they favor growth of, for example, caterpillars can favor growth of those small black ants, termites, and even other small living organisms, which at the end of it all, when they miss what to eat, they will eat the plants. So you'll observe that when you apply these organic fertilizers, it will require for you to apply the pesticides. Hence, when you apply a lot of pesticides, you lose market in those what? European countries. So let's go and talk about also the advantages and the of inorganic fertilizers. So you can add on our list for the disadvantages of organic fertilizers. So the advantage of inorganic fertilizers is that they consist specific what? Nutrients designed to stimulate plant growth. Here, if you are a businessman and you want to make business in terms of agriculture, it is good for you. It is good to. It is advised for you, or it is very nice for you to apply these inorganic fertilizers, because you can easily calculate. You can say, now I have an acre of land, and I can get someone who studied agriculture to check for me the soil, what is missing in the soil. After knowing what is missing, and after knowing which crop am I going to plant, like for example, if I'm going to plant maize, I know I make a research, or with the help of that person who has studied agriculture, will make for you research and recognize that this plant needs, for example, a lot of phosphorus. Or for example, if I'm going to plant, like for example, passion fruits, and I know that this plant needs a lot of what? For example, potassium. So I check the soil. After checking the soil, then you'll be able to know what is missing. And then after, you apply what is missing. And hence, you are applying the specific nutrient which is required by what? By a plant. And hence, you can easily make profit. So again, we have talked about this idea of predictability, meaning you can predict and know that if I'm adding this amount of fertilizer, I'm going to produce this amount of crop, and I'm going to make this amount of what? Of profit. So it is reliable. So in such a way, you can rely on it. After, if you've made research, you can easily rely on what you are doing. So you can even get a loan in the bank and say, now I'm going to do agriculture. I'm going to go in the business of planting beans. I'm going to go into the business of planting Irish what? Potatoes. And I know I'm going to plant carrots this time. And I know that my soil will not disappoint me. And I'm going to apply this and this and this, and I'll be able to make profit. Hence, it is what? Reliable. Then formulations are blended. You can say here, formulations are blended with quality. With what? Quality. So we can easily know if I've bought an NPK fertilizer, I can easily know what is inside that NPK what? Fertilizers. Because they show you exactly what is inside that what? That fertilizer. Like for example, we can take an example when we have NPK here, can have NPK here, NPK, and someone writes 16, I put 0, 0, and 0, 0. So you recognize that here, this is a label written on my fertilizer. This is a label written on what? Fertilizer. I can easily tell that in this fertilizer now, despite the fact it is NPK, I have nitrogen. And which percentage of nitrogen is there? We shall talk about that next time. So formulations are blended with what? Quality. So let's talk about the disadvantage. The problem with the inorganic fertilizers is that they have many disadvantages. Sometimes they burn plants. Sometimes you can go in someone's farm and you observe that all the plants have been burnt. Again, it comes as a result of poor calculation. They require a specific timetable for watering, so you need to have a specific timetable. That's why sometimes people apply, or they go and try to use greenhouses. Why? Because they need to control what is happening. So increased nitrate level, which increases. So here we can say when we apply a lot of fertilizers, the plants will have a lot of these fertilizers, and when they have a lot of those fertilizers, they will cause, we can say, cancer. They can cause cancer. They can cause diseases in our bodies. So they are not very good Then repeated use of excess fertilizers may cause acidic soil and basic what? Soils. So these are all disadvantages. So in addition to that, people are discouraged from using a lot of what? Fertilizers. But it is good for you to have a farmer, you as a farmer, to be able to have someone to help you when you are, to encourage you when you are carrying out what you, when you are adding fertilizers in the soil. So excess use of fertilizers will cause eutrophication. I wish I had a photo about eutrophication. So, you know, eutrophication, we call it the excessive richness of nutrients in a lake or other body of water, frequently due to runoff from the land. So when we have runoff from the land, that is soil erosion. So you'll observe that if we apply a lot of fertilizers in our soil, so when it rains, those fertilizers will dissolve in water and they will be taken to the water what? Bodies. When they are taken to the water bodies, you'll observe that they will cause, the water bodies will have a lot of nutrients inside them. And when they have a lot of nutrients, especially when you have nitrates and phosphate, they cause this algal flourish. And this algal flourish produces what we call the algae bloom. And this algae bloom normally causes bad smell. It causes cuts off the water, cuts off the oxygen supply, and which will cause the death of fish. So eutrophication can also be caused by organic and inorganic fertilizers, but especially the inorganic fertilizers, because now the fertilizer we have added in the soil or we have put in our soil has been got from the real chemicals, which has been separated again from our soils. So this eutrophication can also be caused by use of detergents, but especially because we are talking about fertilizers, it is caused by fertilizers. So we have talked about the different types of fertilizers today. Hope you've enjoyed our lesson, and if you're a farmer, hope you've got something from our lesson. So I'm going to leave you with some work as a chemist. Exercise. So the first question says ammonia is safe and used as a fertilizer, but some disadvantage. Explain for disadvantages of ammonia as a fertilizer. So you're going to try to explain the disadvantages of using ammonia as a fertilizer. Which of the following is a better fertilizer? So you try to answer this question. Give the disadvantages of use of natural fertilizers. Two advantages of the use of natural fertilizers, artificial fertilizers. Give any two causes of acidic soil. So make sure you try out this exercise. And thank you very much for following. Once again. And tuning in. God bless you next time. See you.